I have served the Duke of Harkwell for 31 years, and in that time I have witnessed a great many things a valet is not supposed to have witnessed. I have seen him dress for battle and return from it with a jaw like iron, and not a word spoken for 3 days. I have watched him dismiss a lord from his study for the offense of laughing too loudly at a woman's expense. I have stood at the door of the library at 2 in the morning and heard him reading aloud to no one, because silence was something he had always filled with the wrong thing. I know this man the way a man knows the house he was born in, by the creak of every board, by the particular quality of the dark in every room. I am telling you all of this because it matters. Because when I say that what I saw at Denby Park on the 14th of November changed him, I want you to understand that I am not speaking carelessly. I am not one of those servants who dramatizes the private hours of the household for the pleasure of the telling. I am Edmund Foss. I have never in 31 years repeated what passes in these rooms, and I am only setting it down now because His Grace instructed me to, and because there are those who still refer to Miss Mercer, to Her Grace the Duchess, as a woman who came to Harkwell without honor. She came to Harkwell with more honor than any of us deserved. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me begin at Denby Park at the gaming rooms on the night of the 14th. His Grace had not wanted to attend. He had said so twice at dinner, briefly and without elaboration, which was his way. Lord Denby had extended an invitation for a gathering of sporting gentlemen, shooting by day, cards by night, and His Grace had intended to decline, until some business of the estate required him to ride to the south boundary anyway, and Denby Park sat conveniently at the edge of it. He did not dress for an evening. He wore his coat from the afternoon, his riding boots still carrying a trace of mud at the heel, and walked into Lord Denby's gaming rooms the way a man walks into a room he does not intend to stay in. I accompanied him, as was my custom. I stood at the back of the room near the door to the hall. It was candle-lit and loud, the way those rooms always are, the smell of tobacco and brandy, the slap of cards on baize, the particular confidence of men who have never had to think about losing. There were perhaps 20 gentlemen present, some at the tables, some standing in clusters near the fire, all of them at ease in the way that wealth permits. The Duke stood apart from all of it. He had accepted a glass of something he did not drink, and he was watching the room with the expression he kept for rooms he intended to leave. I had seen it 1,000 times. Another quarter hour, I thought, and we would be back on the road to Harkwell. Then Alistair Vane arrived. I had not known his name at the time. I learned it afterward, in the way one learns the names of people who ought to have been more ashamed of themselves. He was a broad man in his mid-40s, florid in the face, with the look of someone who has spent his credit on the appearance of prosperity for so long that the appearance has become a kind of second skin. He came in through the side door that connected to the dining room, and he was not alone. He had a young woman with him. She was perhaps 22 or 23, not tall, dressed simply in a gown that was good quality but 2 seasons behind the room. The kind of gown a woman wears when she is trying to appear well without having the means to appear fashionable. Her hair was dark and neatly arranged, and her face was, I will say it plainly because it is how I saw her that night, her face was composed. Not resigned, not afraid. Composed. There is a difference, and it matters. A frightened woman arranges her face to look calm. This young woman's face was calm because she had made some decision before she walked into the room, and the decision had quietened her. She stood at the man's shoulder and looked at the assembled company without flinching. Vane addressed the room with a jovial quality that didn't quite reach his eyes. He had debts in this room, he said. Several of the gentlemen here could attest to that, and they did attest to it, with the sort of laughter that passes for affirmation among men who are comfortable. He had a solution, he said. He indicated the young woman at his shoulder, his stepdaughter. He was prepared to offer a permanent arrangement, guardianship, and all that went with it, to any gentleman of this company who cared to make good his notes. He named a sum, £100. The room responded in the way rooms respond to things that are technically permissible. A ripple of amusement, a murmur, 2 or 3 men exchanging glances with the particular complicity of people who have decided not to object. Someone at the card table made a remark I will not repeat. Laughter followed it. The young woman did not move. Her eyes went to Vane for the space of 1 second, a look I could not read from where I stood, but that I have thought about many times since, and then they returned to the room. And then she spoke. Her voice was level and clear, with an edge in it that cut through the noise the way a knife cuts through cloth, clean without effort. "If any gentleman intends to consider this arrangement," she said, "he should know that I read Latin and I keep accounts. I manage a household. I do not embroider and I do not play the pianoforte, and I will not pretend to be tractable if I am not. Those are the terms I am adding to whatever sum my stepfather has named. You may take them or leave them." Dead silence. Someone at the cards table set down his glass. I looked at His Grace the Duke of Harkwell. He had gone very still. Not the stillness of boredom, I knew that stillness, and this was not it. This was the stillness of a man who has heard a sound in an otherwise empty house, a sound he did not expect, and has stopped everything in order to hear it again. The moment stretched. Vane began to speak, something placating, something designed to smooth over the girl's words and return the room to its original mood. 2 or 3 of the gentlemen began to recover their amusement. One of them, a young man near the fire whom I did not know, raised his hand with a grin and named a figure. £110, he said, in the tone of a man buying a horse he expects to be entertained by. His Grace set down his untouched glass on the nearest surface. £300, he said. The room turned to look at him in a single movement, the way rooms do when the most powerful man in them has spoken for the first time. His Grace was not looking at the room. He was looking at the young woman. She was looking back at him. Her composure had not broken. She regarded him with the same directness she had turned on the company, measuring, not grateful, not frightened. Measuring as though she were assessing an offer for what it actually was, rather than for how it appeared. Vane recovered first, with the speed of a man who recognizes money. The arrangement was concluded in a quarter of an hour. I overheard the details through the door, a formal contract, a period of 12 months, after which the young woman would have the right to withdraw from the household and would be provided a sum sufficient for independence, should she choose it. His Grace set those conditions himself. He did not ask for anything in return except that she come to Harkwell Manor, which she agreed to without ceremony. Her name, I learned in the carriage, was Rosalind Mercer. She sat across from His Grace on the drive to Harkwell and looked out the window with the expression of a person cataloging facts. She did not speak unless spoken to, and when His Grace spoke to her, briefly, about the journey about the house, she answered in full sentences that said exactly what she meant and nothing more. His Grace fell into silence after a few exchanges, not from coldness, but from something I had never quite seen in him before. He was listening, even to the silences. We arrived at Harkwell at past midnight. I showed her to the rooms that had been hastily prepared. She thanked me by name, having somehow learned it in the course of the evening, and asked what time the household rose. I told her 7. She said she would be up at 6 if there was something useful she might do. I reported this to His Grace the next morning. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "See that she has access to the estate accounts, Foss." I did as I was told, though I confess I wondered. She was in the accounts room by 6:30 on the first morning. I happened to pass the door at 7 and looked in. She was seated at the long table with the ledgers open before her, a candle at her elbow, and she was reading with the focused attention of someone who is genuinely interested in what she is reading, not performing industry, but actually engaged. She had brought her own pen from whatever small case she had carried from Denby Park. A small thing, but I noticed it. His Grace came to the accounts room at 9 o'clock, as was his custom on the second day of every month. He pulled up short when he saw her. "Good morning, Your Grace," she said, without looking up from the column she was completing. He stood in the doorway for a moment. "Good morning, Miss Mercer. Your steward has been recording the tenancy payments under the wrong column for approximately 3 years, she said, and turned the ledger so he could see what she meant. It doesn't affect the total, but it makes the annual comparison impossible to read at a glance. If you'd like, I can correct the last 3 years' entries in a morning." He looked at the ledger, he looked at her, he said, "Yes, thank you." That was the beginning. I do not want to make it sound simpler than it was. His Grace was not a man who changed easily or quickly. He had lived 38 years in the manner of a man who has decided that the world outside his own code of honor is not worth much of his attention. And that code, while real and deeply held, did not leave much room in it for being surprised. He had been carved by inheritance and duty and 38 years of people deferring to him into a particular shape, and that shape did not naturally accommodate the presence of a young woman who corrected his steward's columns and added her own conditions to other people's transactions. And yet, over the weeks that followed, I watched something alter. It was not dramatic. It was the kind of change that happens in a house the way daylight changes, slowly, without a single moment you can point to, until you look up one afternoon and realize the room is different than it was. He began to take his afternoon correspondence in the drawing room rather than the study, in the weeks when Miss Mercer was working in the adjoining records room. He told himself, I believe, that the fire was better there. I did not contradict him. She did not acknowledge the change, either, only worked steadily at whatever she was working at, occasionally asking a question through the open door about a tenancy arrangement or a supplier's name, and he answered without hesitation, as though he had been waiting for the question. He rode the boundary with her twice at her request, because she had noticed that 3 of the southern cottages had drainage issues that the accounts suggested had been flagged without resolution. He had not known this. He was the Duke of Harkwell, and he had not known it because no one had thought it worth his attention. Miss Mercer thought it worth his attention. She said so, briefly and without reproach, and he rode with her the following Tuesday, and the work was ordered the following Wednesday. I watched him come in from that second ride and stand in the entrance hall for a moment, not calling for anything, not giving orders, just standing there in his coat with mud on his boots and his hat in his hand, and something in his face that I had not seen in 31 years of watching him. He looked well was the only way I could put it. He looked unexpectedly, bewilderingly well. There was a Sunday in the middle of February when a late storm came in off the hills and kept the household inside, and I found the 2 of them in the dining room at the far end of the long table, His Grace with his estate maps, Miss Mercer with her Latin texts, not speaking, not requiring one another to speak, simply occupying the same room in the particular comfortable silence that is either native to 2 people or is entirely impossible between them. His Grace looked up once and offered to have the fire built higher. She said she was perfectly warm. He looked back at his maps. That was all. But I have set enough fires in this house to know what warmth looks like when it is between people rather than in the grate. She was not an easy woman, and I do not say that as a criticism. Ease was not a quality life had offered her in large quantities, and she did not therefore traffic in it freely. She was direct in a manner that occasionally wrong-footed the housemaids, who were accustomed to a household where the guests were deferential and the requests were softened by social habit. Miss Mercer did not soften requests. She phrased them clearly, thanked precisely when the thing was done, and moved on. The housemaids adjusted to this within a fortnight and subsequently found it, I believe, refreshing, in the way that precision can be refreshing once you stop expecting something else. His Grace, too, adjusted, and then, somewhere in the adjustment, stopped adjusting and simply began to be at ease, which was not the same thing at all. He deferred to her once on a question of household expenditure, a question I would normally have brought to him alone, and afterwards stood in the hall looking at the door she had closed behind her with the expression of a man who is realizing that deferring to someone is a very different experience from the outside than from the inside. Miss Mercer was less easy to read, but I had been watching people in this household all my life, and I watched her. She did not wear her feelings in an obvious manner. She had been trained out of that, I thought, by some history I did not know in full, but there were moments. A Tuesday morning, when His Grace made a dry remark about the Denby shooting party's reputation for accuracy, and she pressed her lips together in a way that was unmistakably the suppression of a smile. An evening in the library when he asked what she was reading and she told him, and the conversation that followed had lasted an hour and 40 minutes. I was outside the door for the last half of it, not eavesdropping exactly, just present. And when she emerged, she walked down the hall with her chin up and something settled and pleased about her that I had not seen there before. She was not indifferent. Whatever she had been when she arrived, composed, self-contained, armored, she was not indifferent. I noted it and kept my own counsel. The month of December passed. January came in cold and still. On the 15th of January, His Grace came into the study at 3 in the afternoon and sat down in the chair behind the desk without asking for anything. After a few minutes he said, "Foss." "Your Grace." The contract, he was looking at the surface of the desk. "It expires in the spring." "The 14th of November, Your Grace, so in 11 months. He was quiet. I waited as I had learned to wait. She is free to go, he said. That was the condition. The money is already set aside. Yes, Your Grace. She has not said whether she intends to. No, Your Grace. He looked up then. His face was the controlled face he showed the world, but his eyes were doing something else entirely. I find, he said, with the careful precision of a man who does not often permit himself this kind of admission, that the question is becoming difficult for me to think about clearly. I chose my words the way I have always chosen my words in this house, with care and with the interests of the people in it foremost. It would perhaps not be improper to raise the question with Miss Mercer directly, Your Grace, at the appropriate time. He looked at me for a long moment. Then, no, not yet. I did not push. That was not my role, and in any case I trusted him. I had trusted him for 31 years, and he had almost never disappointed me. February came, March. The estate took its rhythm from the season, lambing, fence repairs. The first movement of the tenants accounts toward the spring settlement. Miss Mercer was at the center of it all with the calm efficiency of someone who has always known how to be useful and has spent her life looking for a place to be useful in. She managed the household's correspondence during the weeks when His Grace was occupied with the legal business of the northern boundary dispute. She supervised the refurbishment of the southern cottages herself, riding out with the mason and returning with mud on her hem and the satisfied expression of a woman who has seen something done properly. On a Thursday afternoon in late March, I found His Grace in the library with a piece of paper in his hands and a stillness to him that I recognized immediately. Foss, he said. He held up the paper. It was, I could see from where I stood, a letter. Her stepfather, he said. Vain. He has written to claim that the arrangement at Denby Park was irregular. He is making an inquiry through his solicitor. He set the paper down. He wants to know if Miss Mercer is at liberty to enter a new arrangement with another party. I felt something cold move through me that was not quite anger but was adjacent to it. I did not show it. I see, Your Grace. He names a figure considerably higher than the original. His voice was flat, the way it went flat when he was containing something. He seems to believe this household is a temporary arrangement, and that her situation remains his to dispose of. Miss Mercer has received no communication from him directly. If she has not mentioned it to me. We looked at each other. I had served this man through a great deal, through the death of his father and the long year of adjusting to the title, through 2 proposed betrothals that had come to nothing, through a land dispute that had consumed 4 years and the patience of 3 solicitors. I knew when he was angry, and I knew when he was something else. This was something else. Underneath the flat voice and the contained face was something that a man of 31 years' acquaintance could recognize as the very close cousin of fury, but directed entirely inward, as though the thing that enraged him was the world's assumption that she could still be disposed of. Your Grace, I said, if I may. You may. It seems to me that the question of what Miss Mercer intends, which you have not yet raised with her, has become somewhat more urgent. His Grace stood up from the chair. He did not pace. He was not a man who paced, but he moved to the window and stood with his back to me for a moment, looking out at the gray March light on the south grounds. I waited. Outside, somewhere on the estate road, I could hear hoofbeats. Miss Mercer returning from the drainage works, I thought, from the direction. He did not speak for a moment. When he did, his voice had a quality I had heard in it only very rarely, not quite uncertainty, but the version of certainty that knows it is about to cost something. Will you ask her to come to the study, Foss? I found Miss Mercer in the records room, where she most often was at that hour. She looked up when I appeared in the doorway, and something in my face must have communicated that this was not ordinary, because she closed the ledger she was working in without being asked, and followed me into the hall. At the study door she paused. What has happened? His Grace will explain, miss. She looked at me for a moment, then walked in. I closed the door behind her and stood in the hall. I will tell you honestly that I stayed near the door. Not to listen, I want to be clear about that. Only to be present in the way that a man who has served a household for 31 years is sometimes simply present without purpose, because the household needs someone in the hall. I heard her voice first after a stretch of his. She was not loud, but the quality that had arrested a roomful of gaming gentlemen in November was present in it. The clarity, the steadiness, the sense of a woman who has chosen her words in advance and is delivering them as she intends. Then silence. Then His Grace's voice, lower than I had ever heard it in all those years, not quiet from coldness, but quiet from the complete opposite of coldness, the particular softness of a man who has arrived at something real and is not entirely sure what to do with it. I moved away from the door. 20 minutes later it opened, and Miss Mercer came out. Her composure was intact, as it always was. Her composure was one of the most genuine things about her. It was not a mask. It was a house she lived in, built by herself over years. But there was something in it that was different, a quality of light, if I can say that without sounding fanciful, something warm. She saw me in the hall. She stopped. "Edmund," she said. She had called me by my first name perhaps 3 or 4 times in the months she had been at Harkwell, and each time it had the quality of something deliberate, a small act of recognition. "Miss Mercer," I said. She looked at me for a moment. "He tore the contract," she said. "The 12-month document." He took it from the drawer and tore it in front of me. "Did he, miss?" He said. She paused, pressed her lips together in the way she had pressed them together over the steward's accounts, over the Boundary ride, over the conversation in the library that had lasted an hour and 40 minutes. "He said that he would not have it in the house, that the arrangement at Denby Park was something he was." She stopped again. "He used a word I won't repeat, Foss, a fairly strong word. About himself, about what he had done in bidding it all in that manner. He is sometimes hard on himself, Your Grace." She looked at me sharply. Then she understood that I had used the title deliberately, and the warmth I had noticed came into her face so fully that she had to look away for a moment to recover herself. "He asked me," she said to the wall, "if I would be prepared to consider a different arrangement, an entirely different one. He said he understood if the answer was no. He said he would make good on the original contract regardless, that the money was there and I was free." He used the word free several times. Foss, I noted it. "His Grace values freedom," I said, "particularly other people's." She turned back to me. Her eyes were bright, but she was smiling now, the full version of the smile I had glimpsed in fragments over the winter months, the one she kept behind the composure for moments she decided were worth it. "I told him," she said, "that a woman who was genuinely free might also freely choose to stay, and he seemed to find that difficult to process for a moment." "He will manage it," I said. "He did manage it," she said, "eventually." She straightened slightly, the way she straightened when she was returning to herself after something that had moved her. "I have accounts to finish," she said. "And I imagine His Grace will need you shortly." "I imagine he will, miss." She walked down the hall with her chin up and her step exactly as it always was, not light, not heavy, only her own. And I stood in the hall of Harkwell Manor in the spring light coming through the landing window, and felt something that a valet of 31 years is not supposed to feel, or at any rate is not supposed to show. A great, uncomplicated gladness. The engagement was announced in April, to the considerable astonishment of the county. The Duke of Harkwell was known to be impervious to sentiment. He was known to be cold, exacting, formidable, and not remotely in the market for a wife who had arrived at his manor through a transaction at Lord Denby's gaming party. There are always those, who said it could not be genuine, that there was a calculation somewhere, an arrangement that served one or both of them in some way that was not what it appeared. I will not trouble myself to argue with those people. The people in this house know what they saw. I saw His Grace come into the estate office on the 1st of May and stand at the window, looking out at the south field where Miss Mercer was directing the drainage work, the work she had identified in November and seen through to its conclusion across the winter, and I saw the expression on his face as he watched her. I have never seen that expression on a man who is making a calculation. I have seen it on men who have stopped calculating altogether, men who have arrived somewhere they did not intend to arrive and find, to their bewildered relief, that it is better than anything they planned. She looked up and saw him at the window. She lifted one hand, not a wave exactly, just an acknowledgement, a recognition, the gesture of someone who has grown accustomed to being looked for. He raised 2 fingers against the glass in reply. I turned away to give them that moment. The wedding was in June, in the small church on the Harkwell estate, with the tenants in the churchyard and a breakfast afterward in the long room of the house. She wore ivory, not white, a practical woman's choice, she told me, for a gown she intended to wear again. And she walked into the church with her chin up and her step as it always was, and she looked at his grace standing at the altar with the same direct, measuring regard she had turned on a room full of gaming gentlemen in November, and he looked back at her with everything he was. Lord Denby attended. Alastair Vane did not, having received from his Grace's solicitor a reply to his letter that was, by all accounts, a masterpiece of civil intransigence. Several of the gentlemen who had been present on the night of November the 14th also attended, and they behaved themselves impeccably, as men will when the woman they once regarded as a transaction has become the Duchess of Harkwell, and is looking at them with that particular composed attention. I stood at the back of the church the way I had stood at the back of Lord Denby's gaming rooms, and I watched it all with the privilege of a man who has served this household long enough to know how rarely things end as they should. They ended as they should. Afterward, when the breakfast was done and the tenants had gone home and the house was quiet, His Grace found me in the hall and said something I will set down here, because he told me to set it all down. He said, "You were right, Foss, about raising the question directly. You raised it admirably, Your Grace, when the moment came. In a manner of speaking," he was quiet for a moment, "she told me this morning before the church she said she had known by February that she intended to stay." He paused. "She said she'd been waiting for me to be sufficiently certain to ask." I considered this. "Her Grace is a woman who values clarity," I said. "She is." Something moved in his face that was, on the Duke of Harkwell, as close to joy as 31 years had taught me he ever came. "She is an astonishing woman, Foss." "Yes, Your Grace," I said. "She is." He went to find her then, and I went about my evening, and the lights in Harkwell Manor burned long and warm, and the county would go on for years talking about the night at Denby Park, and the Duke who tripled a bid for a woman everyone else had placed at £100. None of them understood what he had seen in that moment. I think I understand it now. He had looked across a gaming room and seen a woman with her chin up, in a situation designed to diminish her, refusing to be diminished. He had heard her name her own conditions in a room that had not asked for her conditions. He had seen what she actually was, under the gown that was 2 seasons behind and the stepfather at her shoulder, and the £100 figure that had been named for her as though she were a horse at a county fair. And he had stood up and he had bid. Not for charity, not for pity, not from the particular cold convenience of a man acquiring something he might find useful. Because it is not given to many of us to look across a room and see clearly. And when a man like Crispin Ashby, the Duke of Harkwell, looks clearly and sees something worth tripling any amount in the world for, he bids. And he does not let go,